The vineyard stretched endlessly before me, rows of grapevines twisting under the California sun. But all I could see was him, Elliot, leaning against the weathered barn, his blue eyes catching the light like they held the sky itself. My heart thudded, a traitor to the walls I'd built, and I wondered how one summer could unravel everything I thought I knew about myself. I was 25, untethered, and terrified of what his gaze might mean. My name is Caleb, and I'd come to Napa Valley to escape my small-town past, my father's disappointment, the weight of expectations I could never meet. I took a job at Willow Creek Vineyard, thinking manual labor under the open sky would quiet the noise in my head. It was supposed to be simple: pick grapes, mend fences, keep my head down. But then I met Elliot, the vineyard's assistant manager, and nothing was simple anymore. Elliot was 27, all sharp edges and quiet strength, with blonde hair that caught the sun and a laugh that felt like a secret meant just for me. He moved through the vineyard like he belonged to it, his hands steady as he checked vines or hauled crates, his voice low and warm when he spoke. From the first day, when he handed me a pair of work gloves and said, "You look like you're running from something, Caleb," I felt seen in a way that made my skin burn. The vineyard was alive that summer, buzzing with workers, the air thick with the sweet scent of ripening grapes. I worked alongside a crew of drifters and locals, but Elliot was different. He didn't just work the land. He seemed to understand it, like the vines whispered their secrets to him. We'd talk during breaks, sitting on overturned crates, sharing stories of places we'd been or wanted to go. He told me about growing up in San Francisco, about his mother's paintings and his father's disapproval when he came out at 17. "They thought I'd ruined my life," he said one evening, his voice soft but steady. "But I'm still here, aren't I?" I didn't tell him much about myself at first. My past was a locked box raised in a conservative Iowa town, where being anything but straight was a sin whispered about in church pews. I'd left after a fight with my dad, his words still echoing, "You're no son of mine if you don't fix yourself." I didn't know what I was, only that I couldn't stay. But with Elliot, I started to feel something dangerous, the urge to open that box. One night, after a long day of pruning, we stayed late to finish repairs on an irrigation line. The stars were out, a blanket of light above the dark hills. Elliot handed me a bottle of water, his fingers brushing mine, and I froze. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but searching. I nodded, but my chest ached with something I couldn't name. We sat on the tailgate of his truck, the silence heavy with possibility. Then he looked at me, really looked, and said, "You don't have to hide, Caleb. Not here." I wanted to tell him he was wrong. That hiding was all I knew. But his gaze held me, steady and unafraid. And for the first time, I wondered what it would feel like to stop running. That night, I lay awake in my bunk, the memory of his touch burning, my heart caught between fear and a longing I didn't dare name. The days blurred into weeks, and the vineyard became our world. We worked side by side, our shoulders brushing as we hauled crates or untangled vines. Every glance, every laugh, felt like a step toward something I wasn't ready for. I caught myself watching him, how his hands moved with purpose, how his smile lit up the dusk. But with every moment, the fear grew. What if this was real? What if I let myself feel it? And it broke me. One afternoon, during a break, we sat under an oak tree, the heat pressing down. Elliot tossed me an apple from his bag, grinning. "You ever think about staying somewhere like this?" he asked. "Building something real?" I shrugged, my throat tight. "I don't know how to stay," I admitted. He looked at me, his eyes softening. "Maybe someone could teach you." That night, there was a harvest festival at the vineyard. Lanterns hung from the trees, music drifted through the air, and workers danced under the stars. Elliot found me by the bonfire, his face flushed from the heat. Dance with me, he said, half teasing, but his eyes were serious. I laughed it off, my heart racing, but he grabbed my hand, pulling me into the crowd. His touch was electric, and for a moment, I forgot to be afraid. As the night wore on, we wandered away from the crowd, down a quiet path between the vines. The stars were brighter than I'd ever seen, and the air was cool against my skin. Elliot stopped, turning to face me. "Caleb," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you so afraid of?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. But then he stepped closer, his hand brushing my cheek, and before I could think, he kissed me. It was soft at first, then urgent, like he'd been holding it back as long as I had. The world fell away the vineyard, the stars, the weight of my past. There was only him, and the terrifying truth that I needed him more than I'd ever needed anything. When we pulled apart, my breath was ragged, my mind a storm. "I can't," I whispered, stepping back. His face fell, but he didn't push. "I'll wait," he said simply, and those words broke something in me. I turned and walked away, the taste of him still on my lips, fear clawing at my chest. I didn't know how to need someone like this. I didn't know if I could survive it. The days after that kiss were a haze of avoidance and ache. I threw myself into work, hauling crates until my muscles screamed, hoping exhaustion would drown the memory of Elliot's lips. But every time I saw him checking vines, laughing with the crummy heart betrayed me, pulling me toward him even as I fought to stay away. The vineyard was relentless that week, the harvest in full swing. Grapes hung heavy, ready for picking, and the air buzzed with urgency. I worked dawn to dusk, keeping my distance from Elliot, but his presence was everywhere. A glance across the rows, his voice calling out instructions. The way his shadow moved against the barn at sunset, it was torture. I told myself I was protecting us both. If I let this go further, it would mean facing everything I'd buried, my father's voice, the shame I'd carried since I was a kid, the fear that loving him would ruin me. One morning, as I loaded crates onto a truck, Elliot approached, his expression unreadable. "You've been avoiding me," he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. I kept my eyes on the crates, my jaw tight. "Just busy," I muttered. He stepped closer, his voice low. "Caleb, if I push too far, I'm sorry. But don't shut me out." I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that I was the one breaking under the weight of my own fear. But the words wouldn't come. I just nodded and walked away, hating myself for it. That night, I couldn't sleep. The bunkhouse was quiet, the other workers snoring softly, but my mind was loud with memories of that kiss. I got up, pulled on my boots, and wandered out to the vineyard. The stars were bright, the air cool, and I sat among the vines, trying to make sense of the storm inside me. That's when I heard footsteps. Elliot stood there, his silhouette framed against the sky. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, sitting beside me. We didn't speak for a while, just sat under the stars, the silence heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, he said, "I know what it's like to be scared, Caleb. When I came out, I lost people I loved. But I found myself. You deserve that too." His words hit like a punch, cracking open the box I'd kept locked for years. I told him about Iowa, about my dad, about the church that taught me to hate what I felt. He listened, his eyes never leaving mine, and when I finished, he took my hand. "You're not broken," he said. "You're just you." That moment shifted something in me, but fear still clawed at my edges. The next day, I tried to act normal, but the crew noticed the tension. Maria, a seasoned worker with a sharp tongue, pulled me aside. "You and Elliot got something going on, don't you?" she asked, smirking. I froze, my face burning, but she just shrugged. "Ain't my business." But that boy looks at you like you hung the moon. Don't mess it up. Her words stayed with me. A reminder that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as invisible as I thought. As the harvest peaked, the vineyard hosted a buyer's tour, a big event to showcase the season's yield. Elliot was in his element, charming the buyers with his knowledge, his smile lighting up the room. I watched from the sidelines, my chest tight with pride and something deeper. After the tour, he found me by the barn, his face flushed with success. "We did good today," he said, grinning. I nodded, but my eyes lingered on him too long, and his smile softened. "Caleb," he started, but I cut him off. "I'm trying," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm trying to figure this out." He stepped closer, his hand brushing mine. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. And for the first time, I didn't pull away. We stood there, hands touching, the vineyard quiet around us, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I could learn to stay. Maybe I could learn to let him in. The vineyard was a whirlwind of activity, but my world had narrowed to the space between me and Elliot. Every touch, every glance, felt like a step toward a cliff I wasn't sure I could jump off. Yet the pull of him was undeniable, like gravity, and I was tired of fighting it. One evening, as the crew wrapped up, Elliot asked me to help him check the fermentation tanks in the winery. The air inside was cool, heavy with the scent of grapes and oak. We worked in silence at first, checking gauges, but the tension between us was palpable. Finally, he turned to me, his eyes searching. "Caleb, what do you want?" he asked, his voice raw. I swallowed, my heart pounding. "I want to stop being afraid," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. He stepped closer, his hand cupping my face, and this time, I didn't pull away. We kissed again, deeper, more desperate, and it felt like coming home. But even as I melted into him, fear whispered, "What happens when this ends?" When we parted, breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, as if he could hear my thoughts. I wanted to believe him, but doubt was a shadow I couldn't shake. The next day, trouble arrived in the form of a new worker, a guy named Ryan, who'd transferred from another vineyard. He was brash, quick with a smirk, and had a way of watching people that made my skin crawl. He noticed me and Elliot, the way our eyes lingered, and he didn't let it go. "You two awfully close," he said one afternoon, his tone laced with something ugly. Elliot brushed it off, but I saw the tension in his jaw. I knew that tone. That look, it was the same one I'd heard in Iowa, the kind that came before judgment. Ryan's comments grew bolder, whispered to other workers, and soon the crew was buzzing with rumors. I felt exposed, like my skin had been peeled back for everyone to see. I started pulling back again, keeping my distance from Elliot, but he wasn't having it. One night, he cornered me by the barn. "Don't let him win," he said, his voice fierce. "You don't have to hide who you are." But hiding was all I knew, and Ryan's presence was a reminder of why. The vineyard's annual harvest dinner was approaching, a big event where workers and locals gathered to celebrate. Elliot insisted I come, saying it would be good for me to feel part of something. I agreed, but my stomach churned with nerves. At the dinner, under strings of lights and long tables piled with food, I tried to blend in. Elliot was across the room, laughing with Maria, but his eyes kept finding mine. Then Ryan stood up, glass in hand, and made a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his gaze locking on me, "and to keeping things normal around here." The room went quiet, and I felt every eye on me. Elliot stood, his face calm but his voice steel. "To being true to yourself," he said, raising his glass. "No matter what anyone thinks." The crew cheered, and Ryan's smirk faltered, but I saw the anger in his eyes. Later, as we cleaned up, Elliot pulled me aside. You okay? He asked. I nodded. But the truth was, I was unraveling. Ryan's words had dragged me back to Iowa, to the fear that had defined me for so long. That night, I found Elliot by the vines, the stars bright above us. I don't know how to do this, I admitted, my voice shaking. Be with you. Be me. He took my hand, his grip steady. You don't have to have it all figured out, he said. Just take it one day at a time. And as we stood there, hand in hand, I felt the first stirrings of courage, fragile but real. Ryan's presence was like a storm cloud over the vineyard, his comments growing sharper, his eyes always watching. I tried to ignore him, focusing on the work, on Elliot, but the fear was a constant weight. Every time I laughed with Elliot or felt his hand brush mine, I'd catch Ryan's smirk, and my stomach would twist. Elliot, though, was unshaken. He moved through the days with the same quiet confidence, checking vines, joking with the crew, stealing moments to pull me into the shade for a quick kiss. Each one felt like a rebellion against the fear, but it also made me feel exposed. He's just a bully, Elliot said one day, when I mentioned Ryan's latest jab. He wants a reaction. Don't give him one. But it wasn't that simple. Ryan's words weren't just words, they were a reminder of the world I'd fled, the one that told me I didn't belong. One afternoon, as we worked a new section of vines, Ryan pushed too far. He called out across the rows, loud enough for everyone to hear. Hey, Caleb, you and Elliot planning a wedding yet? The crew laughed, some nervously, others not catching the malice. I froze, my face burning, but Elliot stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. Got a problem, Ryan. The air went still, and Ryan backed off, muttering something under his breath. But the damage was done. I felt the crew's eyes on me, and the old shame crept back. That night, I couldn't face Elliot. I skipped dinner and sat alone by the creek that ran through the vineyard, the water reflecting the stars. I was spiraling, caught between wanting Elliot and fearing what it meant. When he found me, his face was soft with concern. You can't let him get to you, he said, sitting beside me. He's nothing. But I shook my head. It's not just him. It's everything. My dad, my town, the way I was raised. I don't know how to be this person. Elliot was quiet for a moment, then took my hand. You don't have to be anyone but you, he said. And I'll be here, no matter what. His words were a lifeline, but I was still drowning. I leaned into him, my head on his shoulder, and we sat there, the creek whispering, the stars watching. For the first time, I let myself imagine a future where I wasn't afraid. The next day, Ryan was gone. Maria told me he'd been fired for mouthing off to the vineyard owner, but I suspected Elliot had something to do with it. When I asked him, he just shrugged, a small smile on his lips. Let's just say the vineyard's better off without him. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. Ryan might be gone, but the fear he'd stirred was still there, a shadow I couldn't outrun. As the harvest wound down, the vineyard felt quieter, the days cooler. Elliot and I grew closer, stealing moments in the barn or under the oaks. But I was still holding back. I wanted to give him everything, but the weight of my past kept me tethered. One evening, as we sat on his truck's tailgate, he told me about his dream to start his own vineyard someday. You could be part of it, he said, his eyes bright with hope. We could build something together. The idea was intoxicating, but it terrified me. What if I wasn't enough? That night, I dreamed of Iowa, of my dad's angry voice, of running and never stopping. I woke up sweating, Elliot's arm around me in the bunkhouse. He stirred, his voice sleepy. You okay? I nodded, but I wasn't. I was falling for him, hard, and it felt like falling off a cliff. With Ryan gone, the vineyard felt lighter, but the weight inside me didn't lift. Elliot was a constant, his presence steady and warm, but I was still wrestling with myself. Every kiss, every quiet moment under the stars, made me want him more, but it also made me fear how much I had to lose. The harvest was nearly over, and the crew was preparing for the final push. The air was crisp, the vines heavy with the last grapes of the season. Elliot and I worked side by side, our rhythm effortless, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about his dream, our dream. He'd said and what it would mean to stay, to build a life with him. It was everything I wanted, but everything I'd been taught to fear. One afternoon, as we loaded the last crates, Elliot pulled me aside. "You've been quiet," he said, his eyes searching mine. "What's going on?" I hesitated, then let it spill. "I'm scared, Elliot. Scared of what this means, of what happens if I let myself love you." His face softened, and he took my hands. "Love's not something to be scared of," he said. "It's something to fight for." His words stayed with me, but so did the fear. That night, the vineyard owner threw a party for the crew, a celebration of the season's end. The barn was lit with lanterns, music blasting, and everyone was in high spirits. Elliot pulled me onto the dance floor, his hands warm on my waist, and for a moment, I let myself forget the fear. We danced, laughed, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged. But then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my sister, the only family member I still talk to. "Dad's sick," it read. "He's asking for you." My stomach dropped. I hadn't spoken to my dad in years, not since he'd told me I was a disappointment. The thought of going back to Iowa, facing him, felt like walking into a fire. I showed Elliot the text, and his face fell. "You don't have to go," he said, but I shook my head. "I do. I need to face him." The next day, I packed a bag, my heart heavy. Elliot drove me to the bus station, his hands tied on the wheel. "You'll come back, right?" he asked, his voice quiet. I wanted to promise I would, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I kissed him, hard, pouring everything I couldn't say into it. As the bus pulled away, I watched him through the window, standing alone in the parking lot, and my heart broke. The journey to Iowa was a blur of fields and regret. When I arrived, my sister met me at the station, her face tired. "He's not good, Caleb," she said, "but he wants to see you." At the hospital, my dad looked smaller than I remembered, his face lined with pain. He barely spoke at first, but then he said, "I was wrong, Caleb. About you. About everything." His words hit like a wave, washing away years of anger and hurt. We talked, slowly, painfully, and for the first time, I felt like he saw men at the son he wanted, but the one I was. I stayed in Iowa for a week, helping my sister, talking with my dad. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. But every night, I thought of Elliot, of the vineyard, of the life we could have. I missed him so much it hurt, and I realized I wasn't just running from my past anymore. I was running towards something, someone, worth fighting for. Iowa was a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying, and facing my dad had loosened its grip. But as I boarded the bus back to California, my heart was a tangle of hope and fear. I'd texted Elliot, telling him I was coming back, but he hadn't replied, and the silence gnawed at me. When I arrived at the vineyard, it was quieter, the harvest over, the crew thinned out. I found Elliot in the winery, checking barrels, his face lighting up when he saw me. "You're back," he said, his voice thick with relief. I nodded, my throat tight. I had to come home. The word slipped out homey and it felt right. The vineyard. Elliot. This place, it was where I belonged. We fell back into our rhythm, but something had shifted. I wasn't holding back anymore. I told him about Iowa, about my dad's apology, about the weight that had lifted. He listened, his hand in mine, and when I finished, he pulled me close. "I'm proud of you," he said, and I felt it in my bones. For the first time, I believed I could be enough. The vineyard was transitioning to winter tasks, pruning, maintenance, and we worked together. Our days filled with quiet moments and stolen kisses. But the fear wasn't gone completely. I still worried about what the world would think, about whether I could really build a life with Elliot. One night, as we sat under the stars, I voiced it. "What if I mess this up?" I asked. He smiled, his eyes soft. "Then we'll fix it together." The vineyard owner, Mr. Callahan, noticed the change in me. One day, as we repaired a fence, he said, "You're different, Caleb. Happier." I glanced at Elliot, working nearby, and nodded. "Yeah, I am." Mr. Callahan clapped me on the shoulder. "Good. You've got a place here as long as you want it." His words were a lifeline, a reminder that I could stay, that I could build something real. But not everyone was supportive. A few locals, regulars at the vineyard's tasting room, started whispering when they saw me and Elliot together. One, a grizzled farmer named Tom, confronted us one afternoon. "This ain't right," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You're making a spectacle." Elliot stepped forward, his jaw tight. "We're just living our lives, Tom. You don't get to decide what's right." I stood beside him, my heart pounding but steady, and for the first time, I didn't feel like hiding. That night, Elliot took me to a clearing in the vineyard, a spot he'd found with a view of the valley. He spread a blanket, and we lay under the stars, our hands entwined. "I want this," he said, his voice soft but sure. "You, me, a life here. What do you want, Caleb?" I looked at him, his face lit by moonlight, and the answer was clear. "You," I said. "I want you." We kissed, slow and deep, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The stars above us felt like witnesses, not judges, and I knew I was done running. I was home. Winter settled over the vineyard, the vines bare, the air sharp with frost. Elliot and I were inseparable now, our days filled with work and our nights with each other. But the world outside the vineyard wasn't always kind, and I was learning what it meant to live openly, to love without shame. One morning, as we pruned vines, a group of tourists arrived for a tasting. They were loud, laughing, but one of them, a middle-aged man in a polo shirt, stared at us as we worked. When Elliot brushed my hand, the man muttered something to his group, and I caught the word disgusting. My stomach twisted, but Elliot just squeezed my hand and kept working, his face calm. Later, in the winery, I asked him how he did it, though he faced the judgment without breaking. "It's not about them," he said. "It's about us. They don't get to take that away." His strength anchored me, but the comments stung. I started noticing the looks, the whispers, from locals and visitors alike. It wasn't everyone. Maria and the crew had our backs, and Mr. Callahan made it clear he didn't tolerate hate, but it was enough to remind me of Iowa, of the life I'd left behind. I wondered if I'd ever be free of that shadow. One evening, Elliot took me to San Francisco, to a bar he'd loved in his 20s. It was loud, colorful, filled with people who didn't care who we were or who we loved. We danced, his arms around me, and for the first time, I felt free. "This is what it can be like," he said, his lips close to my ear. "Not everywhere, but here, with me." I kissed him, right there in the crowd, and the world didn't end. It felt like a victory. Back at the vineyard, we started talking about the future. Elliot's dream of his own vineyard was taking shape. Been saving, scouting land, making plans. I want you in this, he said one night, as we sat on his truck's tailgate. Not just here, but in everything. My heart swelled, but doubt crept in. Could I really be part of this? Could I be the partner he deserved? The Vineyard was hosting a winter festival, a smaller event than the harvest dinner, but still lively. We helped set up, stringing lights, setting out tables. The crew was there, along with locals and a few buyers. Elliot and I worked together, our hands brushing, our smiles easy. But then Tom, the farmer who'd confronted us, showed up, his face hard. He cornered me by the barn, his voice low. "You're ruining this place," he said. "People like you don't belong here." Before I could respond, Elliot was there, his voice sharp. "Back off, Tom. This is our home." Tom sneered but walked away, and I felt a surge of gratitude for Elliot, for his fierce loyalty. Later, as we danced under the lights, he whispered, "I'll always have your back." And I believed him. That night, lying in his arms, I realized I wasn't just falling for Elliot, I was building a life with him. The fear was still there, but it was smaller, drowned out by the certainty of us. Spring came to the vineyard, the vines budding with new life, and I felt like I was blooming too. Elliot and I were a team now, in every sense working the land, planning our future, facing the world together. The fear hadn't vanished, but it was a quiet hum, not a roar, and I was learning to live with it. One morning, Mr. Callahan called us into his office. He'd heard about Elliot's dream and had an offer, a plot of land adjacent to the vineyard, a chance to start small, to build something of our own. "You two are good for this place," he said, his eyes kind. "I want you to stay." Elliot's face lit up, and I felt my heart swell. This was a future we could touch. We spent weeks planning, sketching out rows of vines, dreaming of a label with our names on it. But the world still pushed back. A local supplier refused to work with us, citing personal beliefs, and a few more whispers followed. It hurt, but Elliot's hand in mine made it bearable. "We'll find a way," he said, and I believed him. One evening, as we walked the new plot, the sun setting over the hills, Elliot stopped and pulled me close. "Marry me," he said, his voice steady but his eyes nervous. My breath caught, and for a moment, I was back in Iowa, hearing my dad's voice. The old shame. But then I looked at Elliot, at the life we were building, and the answer was easy. "Yes," I said, and we kissed, the vineyard around us alive with possibility. The wedding was small, just the crew, my sister, and a few friends from San Francisco, held under the oaks at Willow Creek. Maria officiated, her grin wide, and Mr. Callahan gave a toast that made my eyes sting. "To love," he said, "and to the courage it takes to live it." Elliot and I danced under the stars, the same stars that had witnessed our first kiss, and I felt whole. Years later, our vineyard is small but thriving, a testament to what we've built. The world isn't always kind, but we've carved out a space where we belong. Every bottle we produce carries a label with a single star, a reminder of that night when one kiss changed everything. I'm not afraid anymore, not of love, not of myself. With Elliot by my side, I found my home, under California's stars.